I was asking Jared if he's allowed himself to go to the place mentally to kind of imagine a scenario of like, what if Dylan Raiola's awesome as a freshman? Like, have you allowed yourself to entertain that possibility? Because it is on the table, right? I'm not saying it's the most likely possibility, but like it's on the table that Dylan Raiola might just be really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely allowed myself to think that because I think he has that ability. And I think Nebraska surrounded him with a roster that sets up to be reasonably successful right off the bat. I mean, he has weapons, and he has weapons that fit with what his skill set is. I mean, if he's able to unleash the deep ball, and we Andrew Ivins at 24/7 Sports talks about how he had one of the better high school deep balls he's ever seen, and you have Jalen Lloyd, and you have Isaiah Nair, and you have Malachi Coleman, and you have Ja'Cory Barney. You have this speed, and you can't defend everybody. And we know that Matt Rhule aggressively liked to attack downfield when they were at Baylor, when they were successful in 2019. Tyquan Thornton and those guys, it wasn't a 5-yard throw that turned into a 65-yard play. It was like a 35-yard throw that turned into a 65-yard play. I mean, so they've got guys that can run. They went out and they got players like this, and they needed the right quarterback that could help unleash that. And Dylan can be that guy. And then he has a veteran offensive line. Now, their pass protection, we got to see where that's ultimately going to be at and what he's like when he's under siege. The spring game didn't give you a great indication of that. But he has veteran pass catchers. He has Thomas Fidone as a safety outlet. You have Ramir Johnson potentially as a third down running back or as a guy who can catch out of the backfield for you. I mean, they have the right pieces around him offensively for that big season, for that scenario that you're discussing to play out. It's just a matter of, can he be that good at this age? And another reason why it's possible is that, quite frankly, he's been groomed and developed for this moment. Like, there's a reason he's not at Georgia. And it's not just because his dad's name is on the stadium wall at Memorial Stadium. It's because this is an opportunity for him to play right away. You're not doing that if you aren't mentally at the point where you feel like you can go out there, even at 18 years old, and go command an offense and go play against Power 5 teams. And he thinks he can do that. And I don't have any reason to think otherwise either at this point. Now, does that mean that he's going to have 25 touchdowns to 5 interceptions and 3,000 yards? I don't know, but it sure sounds good, right?
Oh, absolutely. And on our podcast last night, we were kind of waxing poetic about Adrian and that big freshman year that he had, and we kind of asked ourselves, shoot, even the Heisman came up a few times back then. And as his career went along, it was, wow, his back is hurting because he has to carry, he's doing everything. And if he just had this and this and this around him, so when you, Schaefer, are talking about Jalen Lloyd going deep, and you got Thomas Fidone and an improved offensive line, it's not too far fetched to think, could we get a better freshman Adrian? And that just kind of builds from there. So
yeah, I mean, if you look at it this way, freshman Adrian Martinez had Stanley Morgan and J.D. Spielman. I can't remember who the tight end was that year. Eventually, he had Austin Allen to throw to, but they chose not to. Not Adrian's decision or Austin's decision here. Just Nebraska's offensive schematics, but he had pieces, and then we saw in 2019 and 2020 when you took away Stanley Morgan, when you took away Divino Zigbo, when you asked for Adrian Martinez to have to be Superman, ultimately there wasn't enough around him. That's why I think Dylan Raiola enters a much better situation. They have better pieces. Now, I wish they had the running back situation completely solved? Absolutely. Is there a chance that could be much better than I think that it will be? Yes. But that's probably the last vestige on this offense, at least for this upcoming season, where I have a real question. I think the offensive line is going to be good. You got a lot of veterans. You got a lot of starts there. I know Thomas Fidone is going to be good. He's coming off of a healthy 2-year run. I'm excited to see what that looks like. I think we kind of forget that you can't develop when you're having to rehab all the time. And so the jump that he might make from last year to this year is pretty substantial. We've got these wide receivers. So there's all of these pieces And if he can stay on time, if Marcus Satterfield can find nice rhythm as a play caller, there's really all the reason in the world Nebraska's offense can take a seismic jump from last year. I mean, there's besides just trading out Raiola and Harburg, there's a lot of other good things going on with this offense.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer, Husker 24/7. Schaefer, I wanted to talk about Bryson Weber and his commitment to Nebraska over the weekend. Obviously, he's a really interesting one for me because of the position he plays and because of the turnover at that position recently. What does this tell you about how John Butler's kind of being received by recruits and just kind of in general?
Well, I don't want to make too much of John Butler just because, I mean, ultimately the staff was all in on Bryson Weber. This is a guy that they were really interested in, but he had to feel good about what was happening with John Butler to want to also say yes to Nebraska. But I think as a staff, they did a great job recruiting him. And this is a guy that's coming in early. I mean, he's someone that, once Nebraska was sort of where he wanted to be, he had made the decision that he was going to get there as soon as he could. And so when the news happened with Evan Cooper, he had to kind of, reevaluate the situation. So I think his trust in Matt Rhule allowed him to feel like they were going to bring in somebody. I think that John Butler is more than just bringing in a random defensive backs coach, and I think that certainly helped. He had a quote to Brian Christopherson about, John Butler is another great coach as well. So for me at this point, they're obviously building something great, and just why not be a part of that? And I think that kind of speaks to the mentality Bryson Weber had even before everything went down. And this is someone that they, as a staff, again, and Cooper was a big part of it, really targeted him for this cornerback spot in this class. I think they like him a lot. He's a fringe 4-star on the 24/7 Sports composite. He's a guy that I think the recruiting industry is going to keep a close eye on as he goes through his senior year. But I know he's someone over there in the stadium that they're view pretty highly relative to what his recruiting ranking is.
And I think with the Bryson Weber recruitment and the special circumstance with Evan Cooper, a big concern that people have about recruiting is they're committing to a particular specific coach and they're not committing to the program itself. And so when you have Coop leave, but Bryson Weber decides to still commit to Nebraska, it should give you some encouragement that Matt Rhule is the guy that they're committing to and not just a specific guy. And it just gives you hope for the future that if there's anything about Matt Rhule, this dude sells the Nebraska program. The dude is all in. And when you have a circumstance like this where Bryson Weber could have easily just, all right, I'm going to go somewhere else because I have a position coach here that I like or have a relationship with, it's encouraging that we have Matt Rhule as a steward of the program.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for recruits and the big pitch from Matt Rhule is it's a family. And so, if you have a member that's leaving, you have to trust that Matt Rhule is going to bring in someone that can do the job. And I think that's kind of where Bryson Weber came down at it. And he had an opportunity to talk with John Butler, and it was a good conversation. But, as he mentioned to Brian Christopherson, I think the trust was there that they weren't just going to plug anybody in as being a defensive backs coach. And I think the fact that he felt like it wasn't just, Evan Cooper wanted me, Nebraska wanted me. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing with how they recruit. I mean, obviously you have those individual relationships, and there's certain recruits that are going to end up here because they have a stronger relationship with the coach than maybe anything else. But they also want to make sure that they have that relationship with the school, with the campus, with the people that are going to be, the weight room coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches, the nutrition staff. They want that relationship with everybody, because when you're at Nebraska, you're part of Nebraska. You're not just one of Evan Cooper's guys. You're not just one of Rob Dvorak's guys or Garrett McGuire's guys. You're a Nebraska Cornhusker. And so I think they really try to emphasize that throughout the recruitment process, because it's part of building the unity is on the front end. It's not just when you show up and we're a team now. They want you to buy into that before you ever get here.
Schaefer, about Bryson Weber as an actual football player and not just kind of what he means for the overall recruiting of Nebraska. a kind of a long, lanky corner, not the body type really they have at that position right now. Do you think that's something they're kind of trying to intentionally make a shift towards in the secondary?
Well, I think we saw with Bly Hill. I think I was a little loud there. Sorry if I blew everybody's eardrums out.
You're
I
right.
think as we saw with Bly Hill, I mean, they definitely like the idea of long, lanky cornerbacks. I mean, I think I don't know of a single defensive backs coach that I've ever covered that's been like, 6'3" is too tall for a corner. We wouldn't want those long arms to happen to get in the way of a ball being thrown towards a receiver. So I think every defensive backs coach ideally would love to find those big rangy guys that can also run and cover. The big thing is, how well does Bryson Weber turn his hips? Because you got to be able to sink and run to play corner. And so I think that's what a lot of the evaluation is. Okay, you're big and you're long. What makes you not a safety? It's the ability to play in coverage and to turn those hips and to be able to move. And they like his ability to do that. They wouldn't put him in this position if they didn't think that he could turn and run. And so that's why I think as he gets here, he's one of those guys that will actually stay at corner because he's long and because he can actually move. The value add there as an outside corner, when you get into the Big Ten Conference specifically, and you think about some of those physical wide receivers, you love the idea of the long arms being able to jam at the line of scrimmage, to be able to get up there on the top of your jump to knock the pass away. So that's what you're hoping a Bryson Weber can do, but it starts with that hip movement and being able to run. Because if you can't do that, then he's destined for safety. And frankly, if you can't turn your hips well enough to play corner, they're probably going to move you to rover, and then someday we're talking about you as a linebacker. Like, that's how this staff works.
And another kind of notable thing that's happened in the past couple of days is the hiring of Jamar Mosey, most notably a high school coach in the Kansas City area. And a big kind of talking point with that is he can hopefully help to establish those recruiting relationships that have kind of gone stagnant. And I actually looked on Husker 24/7, the actual one that you work for, not the fake one.
Appreciate that.
Of course. I'm always going to plug you, Mike J. Schaefer. 22 Missouri recruits since 2000. Like, when I say that to you, like, does that sound like a reasonable amount? Should it be more? Like, what do you think in terms of Nebraska at least getting back into that area? And do you think 22 Missouri recruits in the past 24 years is indicative of success or not?
I mean, I think if you condensed it to the last 10 years, you're probably talking about 6.
Yeah.
And so that number kind of goes down the further away you get from John Garrison and Frank Solich and some of those guys that really recruited that area hard. And it's not that Scott Frost ignored it, but they didn't emphasize it, which was weird to me, because Ryan Held is a Kansas City guy through and through and is well known in there. And yet they didn't really ever make it seem like, okay, we want to go into Kansas City. And, we're going to try to get the best guys, obviously, but what about the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth? And it just felt like they ignored it a lot. And that's the same thing that it felt like Mike Riley's staff did. And to a degree, Bo Pelini's staff, there's certain guys that I can remember. And an example I used on another show, Elijah Lee, this talented player that I watched play, his teammates with the Davis twins, and big, long, lanky edge defender. Rick Kaczynski was interested, but they were slow on deciding to offer. Basically, the kid's going to commit if they offer. They decide, you know what, we'd rather have DeAndre Wills, this kid that we know nothing about from the South, because he's from the South. And he came to Nebraska and he quit on day 2. And he went back to the South, because that's what happens when you quit and you go, you're from the South, you're going home pretty quickly. And so, Elijah Lee goes to Kansas State, develops, goes to the NFL. And it's one of those things where it just felt like Nebraska vacated that area at the absolute wrong time, because Wisconsin has gone through and gotten some great players out of Kansas City. Oklahoma is in Kansas City all the time now and had been pre-Venables. Texas has gone into Kansas City. Michigan has gone into Kansas City. Alabama has gone into Kansas City. What the hell is Nebraska doing? These are the schools that you want to recruit with, but no, you're like, I'd rather go to Texas and get the 75th best player instead of the 8th best player in the Kansas City area. I don't get it. Like, there's talent there. And then what happens is when you vacate like that, The high school coaches know. You don't have the Pied Piper effect. There's not kids from Kansas City that are having success at Nebraska. And so there's just not that excitement and enthusiasm to be there. And so you miss out on some really good players. And it feels like they've really done themselves a disservice. So the staff has to kind of dig out of that hole. And, we saw it. The top 2 players are going to Oregon. Isaiah Mosey's committed to Oregon right now. And then Dawson Merritt's committed to Alabama. Like, Dan Lanning is from the Kansas City area. It's only going to get more competitive. So Nebraska has to do something or just give up on it entirely, which would be a huge mistake.
And you were talking about those top tier schools going in. I mean, and that's leaving out. Lance Leipold's doing good work at Kansas.
Right. Well, and then your local schools, Iowa State's doing well.
Yeah.
Kansas State's doing well. Kansas is doing well. Missouri is doing well. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Nebraska hasn't been to a bowl game in 8 years and has probably pulled 2 kids from Kansas City in that time. I'm not saying that changes the complexion of everything, but when everyone else around your program is doing well and recruiting that area, I don't know, maybe I'd stop and think we could do something different
here. Schaefer, we asked this TK asked this question of us earlier. Is there another kind of region of the country where you wouldn't mind getting one of these prominent high school coaches to get Nebraska some connections back into an area?
It's weird because I tend to think, out west is always a little bit less competitive, even though the recruiting world has gotten really small. I know everybody would want to go into Florida or Texas. I think they have strong enough Texas connections. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I would love to see more help out west. I know Tony White is a really strong recruiter, but I think that it's been relatively hard outside of, Syer Wright with the transfer, but it's been relatively hard to pull some of those California kids. Again, we saw with Dante Williams, if you get the right guy in that area, you can be really successful. Also, Arizona. I mean, Nebraska has a really rich history in Phoenix and in Arizona in general. And that one kind of feels like it's always sort of if we get a kid, we get a kid. But I'll tell you this, Phoenix is an area where those kids aren't just lining up to go to Arizona State. Everybody else in the country is like, ooh, Arizona State, that could be fun. And the kids in Phoenix are like, nah, we're going elsewhere. So I think that would be an area. I don't know. I don't have a name that, that's the other thing. I can spout stuff, but I can't give you like, oh yeah, go hire this guy. But I look at Phoenix and Los Angeles as 2 areas where Nebraska has history, can build stronger connections, and isn't already overlapped in the way that they are in Texas. With Florida, I just think it's so hard. I think they had Evan Cooper, they had Philip Simpson. They did some nice work in there, but it's just going to be hard to be successful year in and year out in the Sunshine State.
That's Mike J. Schaefer, Husker 24/7. Great stuff as always, Schaefer. We appreciate the time, and we hope Slider's feeling better.
All right, I appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.